I bet you can't name a single war movie that looks like Dunkirk. Because it's not a war movie at all.
There's a particular expectation you go into as an audience member for what you're going to get. And we all want to see interesting, exciting things in movies. We all want to see a story that in some way is a little bit different from, what you saw last week at the movie theater or whatever.
Christopher Nolan just remade Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds.
You don't expect me to believe that.
Oh, I don't give a damn what you believe.
What I knew I wanted the film to be, which was a suspense thriller rather than a war film.
No one called it a war.
So the language of suspense felt like the right language for me.
I was looking at the cinema of Alfred Hitchcock, and if you look at Hitchcock, it's very much visual storytelling. That's the most visual language of film there is.
Most pure cinema, it's really much more about sort of physical situation of the character than it is about what they say about what's going on.
And so it leads you towards an approach stripped down of dialogue.
Just dive into, can they carry this guy on a stretcher across a plank without falling over like that?
Look, bear with me. He traps a bunch of terrified young men on a beach, and the monster comes from the sky. They have absolutely no way to fight back. They don't know when it's coming. It just swoops down and wreaks havoc. It's The Birds, where instead of a bunch of angry seagulls, it's a German dive bomber.
Why are they trying to kill people?
I wish I could say.
You think I'm grasping at straws here? Get this. The working title for Dunkirk was Bodega Bay.
I feel as if I don't understand you at all, and I want so much to understand.
Not really the big reveal moment I thought it would be, but Bodega Bay is the very same town where Hitchcock shot The Birds.
In Bodega Bay early this morning, a large flock of crows attacked a group of children who were leaving the school during a fire drill.
And so, to me, the idea of telling that story as a Hitchcockian experience really felt like the right way to approach that.
Now you think this is just a coincidence, but let me tell you something. Christopher Nolan does not do random. Before he even got a green light from the studio, he brought his crew in to watch 11 films that would serve as the inspiration for Dunkirk. Only 2 of them were war movies.
I like to cast a pretty wide net in terms of films to show the crew before we start. We looked at some David Lean films for the treatment of landscape. We looked at Ryan's Daughter, the treatment of the beaches in that extraordinarily visual film.
The rest were about fear, Alien, Speed, and the wages of fear.
Because the thing about Wages of Fear is it's all about physical process. These spinning truck tires and the creaking wood structure that's on, and is it going to give way, is it not? And so you start to get this thing of you can create empathy for characters in film, and Hitchcock understood this better than anyone, just by virtue of their physical situation.
The entire premise of Dunkirk for the director was to make everyone petrified. Because 20 years ago, when he first came up with the idea for it, he was terrified himself. It's July 1992. A young couple goes down to a dock and climbs onto their buddy's little sailboat. They want to cross the English Channel, just 20 miles. Nice little romantic afternoon.
My plan was to catch all the tides and then make it probably in the evening, sort of 8 in the evening.
And around midday, the sky gets dark. It starts pouring rain, and the kid starts to panic. The trip is supposed to take a few hours. 5 hours go by. They aren't even halfway across.
And the crossing was extremely difficult. The channel was very rough.
The girlfriend is just green in the face, and the buddy who owns the boat is fighting the ocean just trying to keep the 3 of them alive.
It was a very, very, very rocky crossing, and it took us a lot longer than we thought it was going to.
And it turned out to be just ridiculously challenging. It was an appalling experience. It took way longer than it should have. We were out there for about 19 hours making that crossing in very, very rough seas. The channel was extremely rough. And it actually felt, at times, life-threatening. It felt dangerous. It was not a particularly experienced sailor on open water. And that was without people dropping bombs on us. We weren't heading into a war zone.
So I came away from that experience with my respect and fascination for the people who'd taken part in the real evacuation absolutely cemented.
And I think that was really the beginning of the notion of, well, if I ever had the chance, maybe one day, try and express that in film. What would it have been like to be there? Not just the history of it, not the politics of it, but the experience of it.
Nolan didn't want to write Dunkirk. He wanted to not write it.
And that's the reason it's a much shorter film than my usual films.
His big idea was he's going to get hundreds of actors on a beach in France, give them rough guidelines, point the cameras at them, and let them improvise the evacuation in real time. So he takes this brilliant idea to his producer, who happens to also be his wife, Emma, the unfortunate young lass who threw up on the boat 20 years ago.
I don't say no exactly. I would say I listen to the way Chris wants to do something, and I question whether it's the right way to do it, I would say.
So he sat down and wrote one.
Well, I constructed the script, and I say constructed rather than wrote, because right from when I was trying to work out the structure before I sat down to write,
I approached the structure from a very mathematical and geometrical point of view. A lot of diagrams, a lot of careful planning about how I was then going to write the script.
I only wrote a 76-page script because I always knew the film had to be lean and stripped down. So it was very, very tight, with a lot of careful stage directions and so forth and indications, but very little dialogue. So what I wanted to do was not use dialogue for what, as a writer, I usually use it for, and most movie writers use it for, which is a character turns up on screen and you use the dialogue for that character to make their case for why you should care about them. And I wanted to just not do that and sort of look at other ways of doing it.
And of course, because it's Christopher Nolan, he can't just tell a story from beginning to end like a normal storyteller. He's got to mess with the clocks.
Well, Chris is very fascinated by time. It seems to me all his films play with time very imaginatively.
But the structure came about as a result of saying, I want to tell this in a very subjective way, in a very human scale way. I only want to see really what the characters are seeing who are involved. But for people who don't know the story particularly, you want to build up that larger picture.
I didn't want to cut to generals in rooms with maps kind of pushing things around or whatever. I didn't want to give the audience knowledge that the characters didn't have.
And the way I chose to do that was to divide it into these multiple points of view.
And time becomes a tool in that, because when you break the story into its land, sea and air components, essentially, you're working on a very different timescale for a Spitfire pilot who had about an hour's flying time over Dunkirk, or the guys on the beach who were there, some of them up to 9 or 10 days, and a week in the case of our characters.
The ultimate point of confluence of the three storylines is about a coming together in physical space, but it's also about a coincidence, literally, of different timescales.
So when you're cross-cutting these different timelines, you're never departing from the subjective storytelling, the human scale storytelling, but you are starting, hopefully, to build up a coherent picture of the larger events that need telling in any version of the Dunkirk story.
Did you have any concerns about it being a difficult thing for an audience to grasp, or did it feel that it was something that people could grasp?
Well, it's like, fuck it, I mean, to give a slightly more sophisticated answer, it's my job as a writer-director particularly to try and be the audience for the film as I'm writing the script. In that way, my hope is that there are enough signifiers, there are enough familiarities to the rhythm of the piece I'm putting together that the audience can feel oriented. So even if they're confused by certain aspects, the feeling of the rhythm, in an almost musical way, is involving and sort of correct.
It was also, in Nolan's head, the most important story of the 20th century.
In the spring of 1940, it became clear that the Germans would in fact be able to occupy France. And in so doing, they squeezed out the British Expeditionary Force of about 350,000 troops all the way to the coast.
And they're faced with the choice between surrender or annihilation.
And the fact that this story does not end in either surrender or annihilation is what makes it one of the greatest stories in human history.
Because if that rescue hadn't occurred, if home hadn't come for them, if every sort of man, woman and child hadn't come across those 26 miles of rough water under attack, then the world would have changed, because there's no question that Britain would have fallen prey to the Nazi threat. Europe would have changed completely.
Historians gently disagree. Britain still had millions of troops elsewhere. The Royal Navy still controlled the Channel. The Wehrmacht was already turning east toward the Soviet Union. Dunkirk, the consensus goes, was a near disaster that the British turned into a myth.
Started me asking the question as to why in modern cinema has this never been addressed, even though I think it's one of the great stories in human history. I think the answer to it is, it's a British subject that requires an American budget.
He believed it so completely that by the time he walked into Warner Brothers to pitch the film, the movie was already half finished. Nathan Crowley, his trusty production designer, was already in France, at the beach at Dunkirk, scouting locations.
To just understand the physics of the real place and where people were, the geography and the geometry of the real situation. I brought Nathan Crowley there to have a look at it, really for reference. We didn't necessarily think we were going to shoot there.
Nolan walked in and asked if Warner Brothers wanted to pay for what he'd already started. They did.
So I was wondering what that conversation was like at Warner Brothers when you said, yeah, I want to make this big film about something most Americans have never heard of.
I didn't pitch it like that. Jesus. We've earned a lot of trust from the studio. Trust being a euphemism for money. And at the end of the day, when you have a good relationship with the studio, they're prepared to take a gamble. We've also brought them material in the past. I mean, I remember with Warner's when we brought them Inception and we said, okay, you've all got to read it and then tell us right away whether you want to do the film or not. I mean, I actually felt sorry for them. It was like, it was a crazy script. But we'd had this huge film with them and they wanted to work with us again. And I'm like, this is what we want to do. My pitch was, there are so many Hollywood movies over the last 50 years that have their Dunkirk moment. It's just unacknowledged as to where it comes from. If you look at Sam Raimi's first Spider-Man, or if you look at Independence Day, these films, they all have this moment, and this is where it comes from. So that's really the pitch. And then the promise to the studio, which I've tried to deliver on, is we're going to make this as visceral and exciting and spectacular an experience as possible, and hopefully that transcends cultural boundaries, national boundaries. I think it was a powerful pitch. We also, we said we'd do it for a lot less money than we'd made our last few films, and we found ways to do that, and that was sort of the trade-off.
Nolan had a beach and a small army of extras. He needed to make them feel real. 18 years earlier, another director had taken a beach and an army of extras and made what still is the most cited war sequence in modern cinema. So Nolan called his old director buddy Steven Spielberg. He asked Spielberg to lend him his personal pristine 35mm print of Saving Private Ryan, a copy that had been screened in total 12 times in 20 years, so Nolan could show it to his department heads. Spielberg said yes and threw in advice to leave his imagination, as he did on Ryan, in second position to the research.
What I wound up doing was researching the history, getting the evacuation and the events of the evacuation sort of in my bones, if you like, kind of under my fingers. And then I had the honor and privilege of sitting with a few veterans as I was writing the script. Joshua Levine, our historical advisor, was able to set up some interviews with me.
Two things kept coming back. The first was that nobody at Dunkirk really fought. The German army was hammering the British retreat from inland. The Luftwaffe was attacking from the sky. And on the beach itself, there was no enemy left within range. 400,000 soldiers were standing in lines on the sand. The defining experience of the most important battle of the 20th century was waiting. The second was that most of the men doing the waiting were kids.
It was very important to me in taking on this historical reality that we not do the usual Hollywood thing of casting 30-year-olds as 19-year-olds. It's an important thing, I think, to have in the film. The way we still fight wars, we send our children to fight these wars. And so we wanted to find people of that age. And so we were looking at open casting calls, people who didn't have agents yet, people in drama school. I mean, Tom Glencarney, who plays Mark Rylance's son, dropped out of drama school to come and do the film. I gather they let him graduate based on the film, which is good. I hope so. But, and Finn Whitehead, who plays what I consider the lead of the ensemble, had really done nothing, no film work before. And that was very important to us to have these fresh faces. And really, we wanted faces that when the film starts, there's no expectation that this guy is going to take on the whole German army or win the day or whatever. You're just looking at this kid thinking, I don't want him to get killed. I want him to be okay. And that was what was important.
And then he cast another kid for the beach, a young laddie by the name of Harry Styles, which sounds like the opposite of an unknown, except Nolan didn't know who Harry Styles was when he cast him.
I don't think so.
For the pilot, Nolan needed someone who could carry the suspense without a face. Tom Hardy was the obvious call.
Yeah, and nobody works with a mask like Tom.
Thanks to you, I think.
He's pretty remarkable.
No one cared who I was till I put on the mask.
It's funny, I couldn't get him out of my head to play the part, and it was partly because I knew that I didn't want to do, in all of the war movies you see, the older war movies, they put the mask on and then they pull it off, and they put it on, they pull it off every time they want you to see the actor's face, and it's just not what they did. They put them on, they needed that mask there, and
I knew that Tom would be able to draw the audience into his process with very little dialogue and just, I mean, at times it's really just one eye that you're seeing. And
what he's able to do with that one eye is more than most actors could do with their whole bodies.
Mark Rylance's character was based on a real man. Charles Lightoller was the second officer of the Titanic. He survived the sinking and almost 30 years later brought home more than 100 British soldiers in his small yacht, which had the capacity for 20 people at max.
You should be at home! Well, there won't be any home if we allow a slaughter across the channel.
And Cillian Murphy got the role of this.
The character doesn't have a name. The character is called Shivering Soldier. What the character represents is all of those men that came back from that conflict, you know, mentally destroyed.
When the shooting started, Nolan had one rule: avoid CGI. If something was going to end up in the movie, it had to happen in front of the camera. The first thing that followed from this rule was the location.
So the film was shot in the actual place that these events took place, and I think that set the tone for everybody involved with the film to really try and be as, I suppose, as authentic and you know, as accurate as possible.
Production timed the start of the shoot to coincide with the calendar dates of the real operation.
Now, the fact that we were on that beach on the anniversary just adds to the feeling for me of authenticity about the film and the telling of the story.
During the real evacuation, there was the Mole, a giant concrete pier in the harbor, and that's literally where 200,000 men escaped from. But it's been over 70 years, so the original Mole is mostly gone. But that doesn't stop Nolan. The crew rebuilt a quarter-mile of wooden piers straight out into the freezing ocean, right on the exact line where the old one was.
And I feel very strongly the Mole is the most important physical set, if you want to call it a set, of the entire film. That was our effort had to be. What we needed to do was reproduce the concrete and wood structure, this white structure that had been there originally.
In pre-production, we spent a lot of time looking at how far we'd be able to build, and we initially thought, well, maybe we can go all the way out to the end, and then reality kicked in as we began to budget the film.
They're sticking 600 extras on this thing at a time, and the weather in the English Channel is so bad, the waves just keep tearing the pier to pieces. The crew has to keep hammering it back together between takes.
We ended up on various occasions coming in the morning and finding that bits of our Mole had been washed away.
For the wide shots of soldiers on the beach, production hired 6,000 extras. But the beach is so damn big, 6,000 guys just looks like a big pool party.
So I look back at the silent era and how, you know, Cecil B. DeMille, Griffith, you know, how they're using their extras counts, how they're using the movement of humanity to sort of tell you something story-wise. And so in Dunkirk, that becomes about movement, a rippling effect along a line of people, or a lot of people hitting the deck at one point. You're being told something narratively by the crowd that you couldn't tell through an individual. Then you're getting your biggest value out of your extras count.
Being, you know, the people who were a little bit further back in the frame, they didn't have to have the pristine uniforms. We had costume designer Jeffrey Curland had sort of done this incredible thing of basically taking, you know, cheap fabric and printing the texture of a real wool uniform.
When you're doing handheld with the IMAX camera, the shot was pretty much almost 360. So I then started dressing the crew in these jumpsuits. So makeup and hair was wearing these at all times, and we could disguise them in some way we could hide them. Then we also used it for the ADs to wear in the big shots so that they could handle the extras in the deep background, and they were all within that. So these came in very handy, as did these gas capes. We used these also as camouflage for crew so that everybody could move freely within the shot.
And so there further back, we also used some more old-fashioned techniques.
We did these kind of fences of paintings of men. 3 guys would hold it up and one would walk in front of them or whatever. So it appeared that we had thousands more extras than we did. We would paint trucks in particular shapes or boats, whatever, and put them further down the beach. And some of those older techniques that allow you to avoid the CG mise-en-scène, they allow you to stay in camera and retain the quality of the original photography. A lot of those techniques have been forgotten, and they're really great, and they're cheaper than the CG solution.
Then the boats.
What I'd never done before is boats. And to sort of go in with what I'm told is the largest marine unit in movie history, that was very daunting. And the sheer challenge of trying to orient the boats, get them in the right place at the right time for the shot with that many vehicles, it's difficult. But I had a great team of people who came together. There was a lot of planning that went into it. And it felt worth that extra effort. You know, when you get to moments where you see the little ships participating in the evacuation and you realize those are the real little ships who actually did it in 1940.
The Little Ships of Dunkirk are a registered society of civilian vessels that actually crossed the Channel in 1940.
When we heard about Christopher's film and the idea of using real Dunkirk vessels, that became quite exciting. Part of the reason for owning these ships is to try to remind people of the history of Dunkirk and how important it was.
Just seeing the soldiers, we went right up to the beach and took them on board Elvin, and it really makes you appreciate the risks that they were going through and how the country just all pulled together.
Nolan also needed the largest of the rescue ships, the British destroyer.
Where are the destroyers? There'll be one soon.
The last working British World War II destroyer, HMS Cavalier, was preserved as a museum.
There was no way that they were going to let us pull that out to sea. It wasn't practical. So we looked elsewhere and we found a French destroyer from slightly later.
We dress it as well as we can, but it's 80 feet longer. You know, there are differences from the historical record. But for me, the feeling of authenticity of having a real boat there that actors are actually interacting with, as opposed to a CG.
That obviously you could make a period perfect CG version, but it wouldn't feel as real. So there are compromises and choices that we made, within that, but all from a position of knowledge and research.
The drowning ship sequence needed controlled water.
We did interior tank work for some of the night scenes and for the trawler itself and for the destroyer interiors.
We built this set in the tank so we could use huge dump tanks and flood it.
For the planes, Nolan needed Spitfires.
The aerial sequences, it was very important to me that we try to achieve as much in camera as possible.
When we looked at all of the different dogfights that have been done in films, right the way back to Wings and Hell's Angels, by way of Battle of Britain, Top Gun, all of them. The thing that lets all of them down are the shots of the actors. In one way or another, they're artificial because they're green screen in more modern films or to do with exposure balance, things like that. My stunt coordinator came up with the idea of buying a Soviet-era Romanian plane called a Yak. It's about the same size and shape as a Spitfire, but we could buy it, own it, change it to look like a Spitfire.
You don't want to be drilling holes in a Spitfire. And we've got holes all over this Yak from different mounts and different canopies.
And then it has two cockpits.
So we could have a real pilot flying while we had our actor up in the air with a camera mounted on the wing getting his close-ups. And that was the kind of thing we really wanted to do, to try and tell this aerial story in a way that we hadn't seen before. So we were able to get real Spitfires, a real bomber, real Heinkels, and really try and get the IMAX camera places we'd never got it before.
We had one camera mounted on the wing of a mock-up Spitfire that we were going to catapult out in the sea, and the divers, they were all going to be there, and we were going to retrieve that camera. The plane got catapulted and the divers were swimming to the plane, but the plane literally sank to the bottom, like in a matter of like a few seconds. So then it went to the sea bottom, and
it took, I think, an hour for the divers to really start to unstrap the camera, and by the time that we recovered the camera, of course, the tank had filled itself with water.
The camera was broken. Everything was soaked. It was literally just laying on the sea bottom. But focus puller Bob Hall and our loader, they came up with a plan, and they took the magazine to the dark room and they poured fresh water over it and they sealed it and sent it back to America in a container immersed in water, and the shot that actually made it to the film. So it looked great. I'm kind of almost thinking I should treat all my all my images with salt seawater at some point.
There was some footage that we weren't going to be able to achieve in a real plane, and so there was a certain amount that we had to shoot on a set.
So we basically took the point of view of not using any green screens or blue screens and trying to shoot things in such a way that there was always a real background.
We built a gimbal that we could counterweight for the weight of the cockpit and everything, and then it could be operated by hand.
It's like crazy. That thing was very close to the edge of the cliff. So all of the ocean is real. The physical G-forces of being in that plane are replicated. All the light mismatches because the clouds are going in and out. That's what it is when you go and shoot something. And that's what Chris was striving for.
Then there's Dan Friedkin, a billionaire who owns one of the largest private collections of working World War II fighter planes on Earth.
Chris went down to look at the planes in Texas, and Dan, he was willing to work with us and help Chris achieve the look and the authenticity of what period we were shooting.
And the fact that Dan was actually able to fly, the most important plane himself, he had an integration into the production, and was very important to getting those things done for real.
The scene was the landing on the actual Dunkirk beach. It was the first plane to land on Dunkirk Beach since 1940. Then there was the Stuka. Each German dive bomber had a small, wind-driven siren. The Germans called it the Jericho trumpet. When the plane dove, the propeller on the siren spun up and produced a scream loud enough to drown out the engine itself. It was a psychological weapon. Survivors of Dunkirk talked about this sound for the rest of their lives.
I mean, there's nowhere to go.
You would get down low.
I mean, when it comes like that, that's the most frightening thing at all.
But the Stukas are lost technology. No design drawings of the siren mechanism survived. So Richard King, the sound designer of the film, invented one himself. He started with a standard air raid siren, drove an electric motor against it to make it spin faster and harder. Then he sealed the whole rig inside a 30-gallon steel drum to get the vibration of a metal aircraft fuselage. He took it out into the California desert and recorded it. That was the sound of Dunkirk. Now let's talk about music. The first thing Hans Zimmer used for the soundtrack was the recording of Nolan's watch ticking.
And I made a recording of it, and I sent it to Hans, and I said, can you start building tracks based on this sound, based on heartbeats, based on footsteps, based on sort of rhythmic elements, and not write tunes, not write anything emotional. The reason being that we all knew, you know, as people who'd grown up with this story, the story of Dunkirk is freighted with emotion. It's hard to even talk about. So I didn't need anything musically to do that. What we needed was to play the suspense and almost create a kind of cold and objective approach to the score. Because the script was written according to certain musical principles to do with approaches to music that can give you a sense of continuing momentum. It's the closest matchup that we've ever had between picture and score because it's one continuous cue for the entire film. I don't know if anyone's ever done that before or since the silent days when someone's playing the piano or whatever.
Well done. That's enough.
Dunkirk premiered in London on July 13th, 2017. 12 Dunkirk veterans, ages 96 to 100, were in the audience.
And standing in front of those guys, about to show them my version of what they've been through was absolutely the most daunting professional experience I've had. It was a very emotional screening.
I said, what did you think of the film? They said the film was louder than the battle.